So you have your notes or module book ready. You've gone over the setting again, and you have your players at the table as you sit down to run your very first ever role-playing game as the GM. Everyone is excited, but you're still not sure how it will go. How do you start the game and prepare for your first adventure? How do you begin the story? Well, you could always do what I do and shout, "Tonight!" on Playing God, or whatever the title of your campaign is. Welcome to all our listeners. I'm Nick Logie, and with me, of course, is Zander Nolan.
Hey, man.
Sitting down to run your first game ever is an exciting and sometimes nerve-wracking experience. You aren't sure how your story will pan out, and wonder if the players will even have fun. Zander, what was it like when you ran your very first tabletop game?
Oh, wow. It's been many, many moons, but I remember that when I sat down to play the game, I'd had a little bit of experience as a player, and I knew the people that I was going to be GMing for rather well. So the introduction to people wasn't quite as difficult, but there's a very real and almost palpable anxiety to running your very first campaign, and you're sitting down at the table even when it's people that you know really well and you've played with before. That feeling of responsibility actually hits you, and you can feel that if I don't do well, these people that I've been friends with and played with for a long time are going to be disappointed in me and my ability. So overcoming that was a pretty good challenge. In fact, that very aspect kind of has carried over to every campaign that I've ever run. It's not a thing that you ever really get over. You just kind of get used to it, you know?
Yeah, with all eyes on you, it's always kind of a harrowing experience, whether it's your first game or 4,000th game.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to do, um, like I've said in previous episodes, have a couple of things in my back pocket. But that's just based on experience and trial and error, pretty much.
Well, let's
But
start off. How about let's start off? Let's designing the adventure.
mm,
Uh,
okay.
do you for your very first game? Do you remember anything about like the plot or like the hooks or anything like that you set up? If you
My
don't, that's
very
cool because I have a vague recollection of my own. I know a few of the bigger points that I went through,
uh,
but if you don't really remember all that hard stuff, then that's fine.
yeah, like I can remember some of the feelings, and I remember what the whole campaign was about. Uh, but that didn't come out until like almost 3 months after we started playing the game, because I'd actually figured it out at that point, because I was a bad GM and didn't figure that out first. But yeah, you can totally take the reins on this one.
All right, so first of all, we could. Well, I said first of all already. Second of first of all, First Blood Part Two. What would you think would be better, in your opinion, for whether or not a new GM, brand new GM, should use either start a campaign or just run a one shot?
My advice is always going to be run some one shots. I would say before you dedicate yourself to an actual campaign, uh, you should take like at least three, maybe four, 1, 2, maybe 3 session games to really familiarize yourself with the rules. Because you can sit down, you can read the books, and you can plan your adventures, and you can do all of that, and it's not going to help you create story beats and help you really understand how being a GM is going to affect you. So I will always advocate run some one shots, at least a few of them before dedicating yourself to a campaign, simply because it provides you with a baseline of understanding how your GM style is going to progress, and it gives you a little bit more insight into maybe some of the longer campaign story ideas, because telling a one shot, it can be something as simple as a one shot that I ran some time ago. A thieves guild hires the party, they're level ones, go down into the sewers, kill these rats because they're eating all of our stuff we keep stored down there because it's illegal. Pretty simple. and they go down there, they do the dungeon crawl, they kill the rats, they get paid. That's the essence of how the planning phase went. But when planning out a campaign, it's uh, okay. So I have this overarching plot, this theme
Right.
that's
It's
happening in
it's
the
much more
background,
involved
way
in
more
doing that.
involved.
See, what I would say, if I my opinion is you should run a short campaign, 5 to 10 games at most. For me, I actually think running a one shot is one of the hardest things a GM can do because you have to
Really?
do yes because you have to do the entire story in one package. You have to introduce the characters.
Wow.
You have to you have to start the hook, run in however many like combat or other encounters that you want to do, and then wrap up a complete story in one session. And
Goodness.
that I feel like that is a lot of responsibility to do a one shot like that. Um, I've always found it much easier for me to do a campaign rather than a one shot.
Hmm. Okay.
So,
Well,
but that's why I say limit it to a few games. So then you get the idea of like a bit more idea of the rules. Which one of the things that I would also say that if you're going into a game that you've never played before and you've never run anything is don't feel like you have to know all the rules because you're not going to. Probably even experienced players don't know everything. We're
no, no, no. I
constantly
mean,
looking shit up.
yeah, we still have the books right there next to us. I have 5, 6, 7 tabs open with different placeholders for rules that I've pulled up on the fly and stuff like that. Like, there's no reason why an expectation like knowing all of the rules is should ever be in your mind because you're not going to.
They're never going to be.
No, no. Yeah, we've been doing this for like what a combined total of like 25, 30 years between just you and me, and we don't know all the rules to the systems we play in. So there's no reason to expect that of yourself. Just accept that it's okay. It's not that big of a deal when when you're putting it together.
Right. Oh, but the biggest reason I was thinking of one shots being one of the harder things is because nothing requires the nuance of the pacing of the game more than a one shot.
Hmm. I can see that. I
Because
can see that.
I mean, whenever anybody I run a game for does stuff, then it always can go off on a tangent, or they want to do something that I either didn't plan for or just didn't expect or something.
Like
Like
last
spending half the game partying.
our barbarian just magically stoned out of his mind on magic mushrooms, literal, actual magic mushrooms, not figurative, literal, connecting them to the magical weave. Yeah, no,
But
that was a
if you're
lot of fun.
not prepared for that, like in a one shot, then if something starts going that way, you can obviously pull people back in. And if it's your
Mm,
first game, I mean I would since you're with friends, I wouldn't say you should avoid like straight up saying, hey, can we kind of stick to what we were going with here? Uh, but in trying to manage the pacing of the game, I think that's
hmm
enough of a task in and of itself that you might want to avoid it. The first game I ever ran, this one
hmm
wasn't meant to be a one shot. It was supposed to be like I think 3 games or something like that. I was not obviously not good at it because it was the very first thing I ever ran. But
hmm
it ended up only being one game, just because that was during the Dark Ages where only one game in at the start of a campaign would ever get played.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, good times, good times.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But like I had some crazy off the wall ideas as soon as I started running shit. Like first, I barely had any role playing experience at all, and yet I was like, I want to do this. Let me run the game. And second, I wanted to put as much bullshit, like dumb, funny stuff in as I possibly could. One the initial place where all the characters met up was an inn run by a guy named Ball.
Ball.
Ball's in. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, see, I
God
had that
damn
kind of
it.
bullshit back there when I was like 8 years ago or whatever, however long it was. And I also had a beholder that he was a good guy, But he lost the keys to his space pod.
What?
Yeah, yeah. It was batshit. Uh,
That
everybody had a
that
good
sounds
time,
batshit.
but uh, my whole notes were one page.
Uh-huh.
It was just like, what's this dumb idea? It was more like a bulleted brainstorm list, really, that I just shoved into the game. It was
Yeah.
fairly ad-libbed for the most part.
Yeah. Well,
But
AdLib is good for learning stuff for like coming up on the fly
yeah, and
as a
it was
first
fun.
timer.
I still have fond memories of it. But so maybe we should break down what you should focus on when designing your first game. So what I'd say is, how do the characters come together? Do they already know each
Ooh.
other? Um,
Yeah.
what is this a setting you've made, or is it a pre-generated setting? Decide on that, of course. Uh, how, like, is there going to be any fighting? How do you deploy the first encounter? And like, how do you wrap up the first game? Whether or not it's a one shot, a short campaign, or you've decided that you are gonna go for ham and do a long campaign, even though it's your first time. Let's start with bringing the people together. How often in your games, Xander, do you see that the PCs know each other in any regard before they actually start the campaign?
I'd say it's pretty close to being 50-50. Sometimes the party already knows all of each other. Uh, Sometimes it's more, one character knows another character, and then these two know each other, and bringing those, two sets of characters in together for the classic four-person campaign. It makes some things easier. It makes other things a lot more difficult because one of the things that people don't really think about when, okay, so if your character, let's say, is a tiefling rogue, and your best friend, this guy that saved your neck a couple of times, is this big hulking orc barbarian. He's kind of dumb, but you love him to death, and he's a good guy. So you guys hit it off. You become friends, and you're traveling
And his name is
to this
Chunk
place,
Rock.
Chunk Rock.
Chunk Rock, the mightiest of
Uh,
orc barbarians.
so you travel along, and then another set of two, three people come together for the game to actually begin in earnest. You're going to trust as a player character, that character is going to trust that barbarian far more than they will trust the other characters, and that's a dynamic that you have to really be careful with because like best friends playing characters that know one another, they're going to try and role play with each other, and they're going to kind of step outside of role playing with the other individuals. So you got to really know what you're doing to really put that set together. My advice is either everyone knows each other, or none of them know each other,
All right, let's
and
run through a
that's
couple
yeah.
techniques. So let's go with either um, what you just said. Either everybody
Mhm.
knows each other, nobody knows each other. Another variant of that, which the Star Wars, is it Star? Do they actually have that officially in the rules? I can't remember. Anyway,
I
you
think so.
when you're sitting around the table, whoever is to your right, what's your connection with them? Like a one or two sentence thing, like this guy sold me a gun one day, and I knew I could get good equipment from him. And then that person who was just pointed to points to the person to their right, and then says something along the lines of maybe they saved my child from a house fire. Uh, and then so on and so forth. Just like a minor thing, so when you meet up, it's not like everybody is completely like, who is this stranger? Uh,
Yeah.
but you don't obviously don't have to do that. When it comes
Mhm.
to nobody knows each other. That is, in my experience, more common than anybody knowing each other at all. Whereas
Mhm.
you said it was 50-50 for you, it's much more skewed towards nobody knows each other when it comes to my games.
Mhm.
So what I'll always do is and one of the things to consider, because you're going to want to do this right at the beginning of the game, is how do you introduce these characters? How do you get them to the same spot, um, so that way they can interact with the game and the world from the get-go?
Yeah. I know that you specifically used the meeting at the Parafith to bring everybody together because a lot of people go to that, and it made sense that the player characters would. Um,
Yeah, let's talk about that for just a little bit, because I know you have a lot more to say, but I actually am glad you brought up that example. One of the things that I like to do, and I did it in Legends of Latir right at the first game, is I created an event, in this case, the Grand Council, where there would be a lot of representatives and bodyguards or whoever just in attendance in the capital of the world. And you can straight up ask, like, you could even when during character creation, tell the players, all right, you could do like whatever the hell you want in your backstory. How did you get here? And there, if you created an event like I did, then you have a lot of options. You could be straight up one of those diplomats, like you were. You
yeah,
could
yeah.
um, be in attendance trying to subvert the the proceedings, like Jesse did, because
Wait, wait, wait.
he was part of the criminal organization, man.
Like,
He was manipulating everything from the first game, brah.
man.
You know the road between those two cities that had been set
Yeah,
up? That was because the
yeah.
Providence Group wanted to do it, so they were pushing hard for it. That's why he was there.
Ah, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense, but still, like,
Yeah, but
damn.
that's another way you can get in. Uh, you could let's see. I mean, you could have just been one of the palace guards, for instance, that you're just in the room and watching the whole thing go down, even if you don't actually interact directly with it. You could be a member of the audience. You, I mean, there's all sorts of options. But just let your players choose what they want to do, and if they come up with something creative, then that's one less thing you have to worry about, and one more awesome thing that they get to do.
Yeah. That's that's one of the more interesting ways to do it. Uh, I still can't believe Jesse was. I'm gonna be reeling about that for like a day now. Jesus. Oh man. Well, so another example. I don't know if anybody out here watches um games online or like on Twitch. Uh, but there's some examples of how people use events and stuff like that with different games. So keep your eyes open and use the resources that you have available because there's games on Twitch, there's games on Roll20, there's game like you could find pretty much all the information that you need.
The tried and true method: you're in a
The inn,
tavern, you're sitting in a
yep,
windowless corner, and the lights are out for some reason, and everybody is at the table.
yeah, yeah. That's the classic one. Like you're at an inn, what do you do? And to add a little flavor to that, it could be a bar fight. I've introduced a party where it was a big brawl that everybody had to fight in, and turns out that like the guys that were the bad guys were the ones that started the fight, and they were trying to cause an uprising and da 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 da.
Yeah, you could have a brawl or whatever, like right in that first location. Whether it is just a bar fight, in which case then you get a better understanding of the rules with minimal, actual threat of character death. Uh,
Yeah,
or you can have like a fight that's important and sets the stage for the rest of the story, while everybody is gathered and kind of focused on this one thing. When
like
it
what you
came to
did.
the Grand Council, the council itself got attacked. Now,
Yeah,
they were going to get attacked, obviously. The players, depending on what you guys wanted to do, what your motivations were, you could get involved or you didn't have to. Uh, Maybe the rogue sneaks away instead of dealing with the froofy politicians. He doesn't care about their lives. Or maybe you are one of the guards at this thing, and you're like, "Uh oh, I have a duty to uphold," and so you draw your sword and get in there.
Yeah.
It's immediate motivation for the characters to start acting, and
Yeah.
it basically when the dust settles and the heroes who don't know each other are the only ones who are still standing, or the only ones brave enough to take on whatever threat you've put forth, then they might be like, we need to team up. What's going on? Why is our city
Mhm.
like plagued by these random skeletons, for example, that started
Yeah.
walking the streets?
Yeah. Another good way to bring a party together is the classic trope: you were all hired by X to do Y. One of
Yeah,
my
that works for
campaigns.
anything, whether they're
Yeah.
strangers or they know each other.
Yeah, because you got to work together whether you like it or not at that point. So kind of got to be uh, kind of got to deal with it. And as you work together, things help and things hinder, and characters can grow and progress together. But that's a really good way. It's a tried and true method. I would suggest going with that. A lot of my campaigns begin like that. I have a reoccurring group in which I call the Adventurers Guild. That's literally their entire purpose, is to bring the party together. So yeah, tried and true methods are always a good way to go.
Yeah, guilds are a pretty classic staple as well.
Um,
Another
if
way you can introduce the characters is, and this involves like a little more preparation in terms of like both the players and the GM working together.
mhm,
Um, make sure everybody has their backstory good to go before before you fully finish up the first adventure, because then you can start incorporating like bits of that backstory into it.
mhm,
Um, and there are a couple things that I would recommend if you go this route, or just in general even. Uh, when the players make their backstories, this is something that I've done. It's not something I've heard of other people really doing, but and you don't have to do it obviously. Have the players, when they make their backstory, give you one page. And the reason why I say it like that is because a lot of people will make, pretty intricate backstories, several pages long. They have their whole lives and all that stuff, and that's cool. Like you can, if you're passionate about the character, the more you write, the better. But
absolutely.
and this goes both ways for the GM and the player. Whatever you give to the GM, have it condensed into one page. And similarly, if you as the GM have your own world that you're presenting to the players, give it to them in one page. Give
Yeah.
them the important points, and then you could always read more of it later. But if you hand anybody a binder or a stack of papers, that is too much information to take in before you even play the game.
Oh, absolutely. There is, especially when you're world building, it's easy to get too carried away with how you set things up. Um, and I am certainly guilty of this. I'm starting up a new campaign here in a few weeks, and I have a lot of information that I've put forward, and it's a pretty intense document. I call it the Player's Handbook. Basically, this is all the information you're going to need to know as a player to begin the game. But the call to arms document is what I call it. It's a quick and dirty, fast, easy way to just all bullet points of
Oh yeah,
this
so
is
you
what you
already do
know, this is
this.
how you do it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Everything else is there and fleshed out for you to read at your leisure. But these are the things you got to know before you start the game, and it's all pulled out in about 50 bullets down a page, and each of those things is really important. Beyond that, everything else is flavor, and
Hmm.
that's where it comes into to it's okay to get out of hand and completely insane with your flavor.
Yeah, and don't try to plug up all the holes, like either plot
Oh
holes
yeah,
or other holes
yeah,
that you
no,
find. Don't worry about that, especially on the first game.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
Oh, and a little bit to add to this, um, something that I'll get into more when we actually talk about s- actual world building and designing, settings and stuff. But leave room for your players, either during the backstory or during the game, to add to the foundation of the setting.
Oh,
Not
absolutely.
like in my game when Jesse made his uh, character, he came up with Providence. I didn't even think that there was like a big crime syndicate underground kind of thing in the world, but he came up with a cool idea, so it became intrinsically part of the setting.
Hmm. Yeah, I think Jess had a lot to do with Moonlight Harbor as
That's
well.
right. She made the map. She did a lot of the stuff when it came to Moonlight Harbor. I pretty much just had a fucking dot on a map and had the vague idea of what it was about, and then she
Yeah.
kind of fleshed out the whole thing.
Yeah, if your players want to create a city that they're from that has a certain kind of cultural theme to it and has a certain kind of feel, and they've got pictures and like Pinterest posts and stuff like that, then yeah, totally let your players do that. But that's more for world building.
Hmm.
Uh,
I just wanted that as kind of a side note to keep it in mind whenever you're
oh yeah,
getting this all set up.
this new concept that I came across, thanks to Jess and my wife Bobby, was to use Pinterest as a means to gather flavor for your campaigns. And you can fill it full of pictures of different locations in the world, cities, even entire nations. You can have a picture that is a rolling field of like greenery and flowers and stuff like that, and it'll give you a frame of reference. And the reason why a frame of reference for your first game is really important is that moment when the players first meet one another is going to be a very intense, and it's going to be a very palpable moment. And that suspension of disbelief needs to draw itself away enough so that when you introduce this place, this location, it's forever etched into their mind. So let's say they meet in a bar, right, in a tavern or what have you, and this
Right.
works for any setting at all. This tavern has to be fully realized as a place. What's it look like when you walk in? Who's behind the bar? Are there people at different tables? What do they look like? Is this a weapons free zone? All of these things are going to set the mood, and that mood setting is and that first introduction of how the game is going to feel will set your paces for the mood for the rest of the campaign. And if it's a 1, 2, 3 year campaign, ongoing thing, the way you describe that location is going to be what the players will expect from you from that point in time. So not only make sure it's something that you can deliver consistently, but make sure it's got enough meat to it that when you provide them with different locations, they can always fall back as use that as a frame of reference. So it's like, okay, so these are what these places typically look like. You remember the first bar, da 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 da. A really
Yeah,
good
you could do that.
example is the Badger Hole that Nick created for our Shadowrun game. We know what it looks like, so much so that I was able to build it in Minecraft, and it looked pretty close,
Oh
I
yeah.
feel.
No, I walked
Yeah,
in there and I was like, this is exactly how it is.
yeah, like it has to be so realized to your players, and if especially if it's going to be a reoccurring location like the Badger Hole was, that it's a real place in their mind, like they can envision it, and that vision is the same across the board. And if you want to print out pictures, there's nothing wrong with using handouts. In fact, I encourage handouts. Uh,
Handouts
but
are
if you
always good.
use, oh yeah, if you use pictures to help you tell your story, then you'll have a better place, and that location is absolutely vital for your first game,
So here's a
whether it's a
technique.
one shot or not.
Here's a technique that I use for the badger hole, uh, or anything that is super important. Is I will write out like a paragraph describing the place, and then I will straight up read that verbatim the first time. So that way I've already have the notes prepared. So I've envisioned the place. I've typed out exactly how it looks to me, and then I read that straight up to the players. And if any new players come in later on in the campaign, or even if just a player switches characters, the first time they enter into their in character, I will say the exact same thing each time, uh, just to make
Yep.
sure that it remains the same in everybody's minds. Obviously, you could tweak it if later on in the campaign something changes the place visually, like when the Badger Hole was bought out and like upgraded by a 10,000% to the Dragon's Den.
Oh yeah.
Then that had the layout was the same, but the way that the scenery was presented was different, so I had to change that to adapt.
Yeah.
But verbatim paragraphs, you're gonna find those in adventure pads, campaign books, friggin' one-shot modules, anything, and it'll tell you just to read this whole thing, and
Yeah.
there's
Read
nothing
this
wrong
thing.
with that.
Oh no, no, totally, totally not. And once you have a baseline for the kinds of locations that you want, uh, try your best to stick to that flavor of location. Even if you change things a bit, if you're running a campaign that's kind of dark and seedy, put a gray filter over everything. It's a little dirty, it's a little dank, and
Are you
even
running
when
a
going into a nice place,
Are you running a noir
same thing.
story? There's perpetual fog, and
Perpetual fog.
and everything's in black and white, and there's always somebody with a fedora in the shadows, no matter what.
Oh yeah, a little bit of smoke
But
curling
yeah,
back behind them.
for the first like general area, try to have a consistency to it.
Mhm.
It you don't have to apply the same consistency everywhere, or if you're like in a different district of the town or something like that, because even in one
Yes.
city you could have a huge difference. But if you're running like a steampunk game, like be sure to mention the like trains or the gears, the goggles, like that kind of thing, like the staples that come visually when somebody thinks of a certain setting. Or like cyberpunk, you have
Hmm.
computers, uh, augmented reality, holograms,
Yeah.
uh, motorcycles, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Um. So yeah. Once you've established your setting, now a good thing to remember. Now you've got your players, you've got your game. Make sure that they have all read, like we said last time. They have all read into what kind of game you're going to be running. Because if you stick to the same theme for the game, they know what to expect, and that's within the purview. But if you change things up too much, then the ability for the players to really get into the campaign will be very severely hindered. So
That's why I always
make sure you're
say
keeping to
to
your yeah.
That's why I always say to let the players be able to influence the setting, because then they'll feel invested. Then they already know some details in the setting, so you don't even have to go over it again.
Oh yeah.
Everybody's infinitely more invested if they can help create the universe.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Um, uh, moving on from that
Yeah, from the
kind of
intro.
the
What like
from the intro.
right, the next thing is like the hook, the first encounter.
Hmm.
Now, classic
The
is a battle.
oh yeah.
Nothing gets you into the game, and the mechanics faster than go fight this thing, or you're under attack. But you can also change it so it's like like a role play encounter or something, where you include dice rolls in it, like persuasion or diplomacy or whatever. Uh, but this way you can also establish a role playing baseline, how you
Hmm.
expect how you expect the players to kind of approach the game and how you are going to be approaching the game. So with a lot of my games, not all of them, but we take role playing fairly seriously. So I'm not going to present a universe that has a lot of jokey stuff in it. I'm going to have it very down to earth, uh, like what you say is important and has consequences, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Unless it is a jokey setting, in which case the pigeon breathes fire and smokes a tobacco pipe that's the size of a cow. Uh, you can go nuts at that point.
Yeah,
But
that left field with that.
right, whatever you start with though, whatever you put forth in your own role play, that's what the players are going to expect from you, and kind of like meld to do that themselves with their characters.
Oh yes, absolutely. And it's really good to use your NPCs because they're one of the greatest tools that you have. It's how your players get information. It's how things are things are transferred from one to another. It's your NPCs, your bread and butter. And if they interact in a certain way, that creates that baseline for your players, and they know how to do that. So don't be afraid to use those NPCs and get the most out of that creation, that money.
That-
It's a really good investment to make good NPCs, because then you have a baseline for what you expect from your players as well.
And they'll also probably show up later on in the story too, so it's good to have it.
Yeah.
With
Oh yeah.
with the first game though, I would recommend kind of minimizing the amount of like important NPCs or named NPCs other than like gray blobs. Uh, I'd limit it to not a hard limit, probably anywhere between 3 and 5, like named people for your first game.
Yeah. Now that being said, don't don't think that we mean like the tavern owner down the street doesn't have a name, because they totally have a name,
Yeah,
and have that in your notes.
he could be one of those important guys. Like if
Yeah.
because a lot of settings, the tavern owner is like the guy who hears about a lot of stuff, rumors, missions, jobs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if he has a name, Willie Stacks, then
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
then you could take him. The sky's the limit.
but when using these NPCs, we mean the guys that these are guys that might go with them on the missions, or
Big
that's going to be
speaking
their
roles.
handler. They're going to have a unique voice to them.
hmm
So
Yeah, the guys who are gonna have like their own personalized descriptions, not the guard in shining armor who is defending the castle.
his
Uh,
name is Todd.
yeah, that's just a regular gray blob type of NPC. But this is somebody that they might go back to ask for questions,
Yeah.
or like get other information, or just befriend them, because that's a thing that happens.
Yeah, like we're gonna go talk to Todd the guard. He's not an important NPC, but even non-important NPCs can be reoccurring, so keep
Right.
that in mind.
Well, yeah, that's true. And also random people like Todd, who's now apparently has a name and is slowly developing a backstory live on the podcast, is after his family was run out of an adjacent town, and he needed
Yeah.
to get some quick coin, but he ended up finding a career in the local constabulary. I think that's how you pronounce that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Um,
Now Todd is a whole NPC. Thanks,
Todd is
Xander.
a whole NPC. Yeah, you're welcome. I go nuts with NPCs, just so you guys know. Um, another good way to kind of set a baseline uh, is to, like I do, have quite a few different adventures and stuff kind of stuffed in your back pocket. And having this as a practice gives you the opportunity and the option to let your players do what they want. And one of the ways that you can do this, and I feel is very valuable, is to present them with several options that they can take on as part of the story. A great example of this is the fact that during the meeting of the council members in Latier, they were talking about these exact issues and that they all need to be addressed. We chose to go and chase down the dragon because we're smart like that.
Well, you ended up doing like a lot of the stuff on that list, but I
Yeah.
presented it so that way I was like, here's the things that are happening in the world, because the actual NPCs like talked in play to the council about the problems that were going on and what they needed help with, and so that established that the world is operating and moving even without without the PCs.
Yeah.
It also gave you plenty of options to pursue what interested you the most, because I had a fair amount of variety, I think, in there.
Yeah. I think it was we go and deal with some stuff underground for the dwarves.
Yeah,
There's
I mean, there was a few things, but
yeah.
the final point is that none of that stuff that I made was fully fleshed out. It was basically, it was important enough that I kind of knew what would happen if there was no interaction with it. Uh, and I had an idea, like some bullet points on what happens when you actually go do the thing, but I didn't have like entire pages of encounters already pre-made. Mostly because I didn't know which one you were gonna pick, and I didn't want to waste my time doing something with
Yeah.
something you'll never touch, like the
That's
frickin' dwarves and the underground thing that you have never bothered with,
never ever
even
bothered with.
when you were there.
Now that's a good point. That kind of draws it back to taking your notes too far. You can over prepare. It's absolutely it's absolutely a thing that can happen, and we are always advocates of take notes, take notes, take notes, take notes. Do as much as you can, but there's a soft limit and then there's the hard limit. That hard limit is designing out your campaign in full with every single episode written out in detail and every location that they're going to come across in earnest with NPCs from the start. And the
AKA the
reason why
most
that's bad
railroady thing possible.
is because it's really railroady. Now, uh, if you're a really good world builder, you can do that certainly. The game that I actually just ended, I knew what was going on pretty much in every location, but I didn't know what the blacksmith in this city, in this country, on this continent was doing right then.
Yep.
And that's one of those things that you have to kind of let yourself be less than perfect, because at the end of the day that preparation would go nowhere. It would do nothing. And taking your time, which as a GM is very valuable. You have a weekly campaign that you're running. You have a set amount of time that you should set aside to prepare. I like to think of it as a college course. If you are in class for an hour, you should dedicate at least 4 hours outside of class per class period to prepare for that class. It's the
You're
same
being
thing
very
with D&D, but
specific.
I double it. I like to double that. Spend at least uh, if you have a 4 hour session, with a break in the middle, and you do that once a week, spend 8 or 10 hours per week preparing for that game. And the reason why is you'll learn your setting better, and you'll be able to be flexible with your campaign. But you're not preparing so much that you feel like you've bogged yourself down, and accepting the fact that your players will see probably on average about a third of the content that you create in any given session. And that's just the nature of the beast, because they might not check in to that room in that dungeon because the lock was too hard and they broke their lockpick, and well, screw it, we're not worried about it. Behind that door was a major plot point,
Yep.
and that's where the phylactery was, and now you can't kill the. Ugh. If you plan it out so rigidly that you don't leave yourself any room for improvisation, then you're shooting yourself in the foot and you're wasting your time.
That's the
So
part that I was waiting for you to
yeah,
get to, because I knew you were going to come around to wasting your time, and
yeah,
you have too much. You
yeah,
have
yeah,
too many notes. What I define as too many notes, because as we know by now, Xander prepares the more detailed stuff much more than I do, where I'll just be like, "Fuck it, we got a 4-hour game. Here's 30 minutes of prep. Let's go."
yeah. It works out. It works out. It does. But that's
Th-
that's when you know your GM style. So
Yeah, but
keep that in mind.
when I'm bringing up the notes though, because this is something that I saw recently, which is why I'm glad that you brought up the notes going too far. A newish GM that I know, the first game I played, which has already been like I think they were playing for a couple months or something like that. Um, he seriously had like 15 pages of typed out document for that game, one game. And the reason why I viewed this as a problem is because of the rigidity that forced him into. Because there was so much stuff that he basically had to read verbatim. There was a point in the game when it was practically playing itself,
Yeah.
and I didn't. There was really no time to interact with the story. So whenever you're running a game, whether or not it is your first time or forever time, um, be sure to include pauses in your narrative um, to let the players know they can interact with this. So that way, it doesn't feel like they have to interrupt you to do something, um, but it also gives them a chance to think to see if they do want to do anything. You
Mhm.
don't necessarily have to put that everywhere. Like if a lot of action's happening and you effectively do have like a quote unquote cutscene that you're going through just to get to a certain thing, then to do that. Just don't make it too lengthy.
Yeah.
When it comes to
If you
my
get
notes, if I'm fully fleshed out on all of my notes and I have even actually have characters on there, um, it's like 3 pages for a game max.
Yeah, I go a little farther because I'm uh I'm a little more detail oriented with NPCs and locations because I don't personally I'm not really able to wing it very well. And
I'm
this
actually talking about when I don't wing it very much. But
yeah.
the important reason why I brought up the kind of like a maximum note size for me at least is because if you have everything super typed out, then and I've seen this and I've done this. It's happened to me before too when I typed up too much shit. Is one, you keep having to refer to your notes for some reason, which slows down the game and seems very forced in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And two, since you don't know exactly what the players are going to do, then those notes obviously might need to spill over to another game. Hence why I kind of decried the one shot idea right at the beginning, because if it goes long or something and you do need to have a continuation, uh, then that could be a bit challenging.
Yeah. Um this particular beat, just so everybody is aware, this is our own personal like experience and preferences. If you decide that you want to take notes like that and you want to write a small book for every session, then that's on you. But remember that your players are going to interact with the story, and if it's a railroady game, more experienced players or sometimes even new players, like Jess would be a great example of that. Um, they're not going to engage with the story as much, and there's a line where you should probably just go and write a book. Like we've said it a couple of times, but it really does come down to it. If you want to tell this story effectively and let the narrative be driven by the player characters in some respect, uh, then you can have a lot of notes, but just be sure not to
Don't go
limit yourself
nuts.
by them.
So I don't usually have everything I say, like you just mentioned, is a what is our preference. This is one of those things where I vehemently believe that this should always apply, and it's not just a preference for us, but it would be a preference that pretty much any player on the planet would agree with.
Yeah.
I might think. Um, it's yeah, don't have the gameplay itself. If you wanna write a shitload of pages, then I agree with Xander. You should write a book. Uh,
Yeah.
if you you have to be open to improv at any time, and that's obviously going to come with practice. You nobody's going to expect you to suddenly pull an NPC out of your ass and then have a fully developed character for them to interact with at a moment's notice. But I would
That's the
it
reason
to
why mine are
practice.
always so long.
Well, yeah, to practice what I do to practice actually even today is I will, when I'm writing something out, intentionally leave gaps just in
Mm,
places where I'm like, I don't know what they're gonna do here. I'm not gonna plan if-then statements. I'm just gonna say like, here's what I present, fart noise, and then start going into the next encounter.
yeah. Now, going into that, if you have an example of uh like a really good place to set is like if you have a murder mystery game, then you're obviously going to have a lot more notes on that particular session than you are for, let's say, their travel montage, or they're going to be going into a dungeon crawl. You're going to have what's in the rooms, and you're going to have what's in the trunks and in the chests and on the NPCs that they kill. That's all fine, but it does depend upon the session and what you have planned. So when we say like, three, mine are usually more five, but 3 to 5 pages worth of notes and stuff, that's for an average session. Sometimes we've got to put a lot more work and a lot more prep into it simply because the episode dictates that. And that's how I kind of judge it. And a good story beat to follow that with is if you have, say, 5 or 6 pages worth of notes for a particular session because the session dictates it and it's important for the narrative, then the next couple of episodes after that, make them real light. Like do a drinking montage where they go out and just let the dice rolls have what they will, and you might only write 1 or 2 pages worth of stuff for that. So it's all in moderation. It's all about timing, and it's all about following the beats and following your own personal flow as a GM, and that just comes with time. Uh, if I were to say any one kind of encounter to stay away from for your first game, intrigue is probably not the way to go. You want
As a
something
very first
a little
game, yeah, I
combative.
agree with that.
Yeah.
I'd say
Now if
stick with something a bit more classic.
yeah. Now if you want to have a lot of intrigue, real heavy intrigue in your game, that's great. I love intrigue games. I run them. They're fantastic. But you've got to be good at it because you could screw up an intrigue game really
Well, yeah,
fast.
that one involves an ass load of improv.
Oh yeah. Um, I screw it up all the time because you just can't take notes for some of those things. You kind of got to let the dice fall where they may, as it were. But if you are looking at a game where you want to do heavy intrigue and you want to have a lot of like mysteries and things like that, that's great. Do not make your very first game or your very first episode
Well,
about
I'd say
that kind
very,
of.
I'd say very first ever game. A very like,
Oh yeah, no, don't
like
do that
no,
either.
that's primarily what we're talking about. If
Yeah,
like the first game in like a campaign, that's fine. I mean, but I wouldn't say don't do that for your very, very, very first game.
yeah,
Uh,
no.
let's talk about running something from a pre-existing module or book or something like that. Like what do they got for fifth ed? Like Rise of Tiamat, what is it, Tomb of Annihilation. There's a bunch of shit.
Tomb of
Um,
Annihilation's a good one.
but those the couple points that I would recommend, and I recommend these for you also, Xander, is obviously read over the first chapter game like a few times, and then also just skim it right before you actually start the game, just to make sure it's all fresh in your mind. Uh,
Oh yeah.
and the second point is make sure that whatever pre-adventure you are running is not something that's supposed to be played at a convention. I found this out the hard way when I was
Oh yeah, yeah.
when I wanted to do. I got the Shadowrun convention mission thing. I can't remember exactly what it's called, uh, but I wanted to use one of those in my actual campaign, which was easy enough because Shadowrun's already mission based for the most part. So it was super easy just to be like, all right, this is the thing they got to do. The reason why I would stay away from convention stuff is because it is meant for a group of like 5 to 6 people who have never even met each other before in real life to come together with characters that are supposed to be built a certain way, and it's supposed to get hammered out in like 2 to 3 hours, and it's very I find it to be very railroady for convention ones. Not so much for like the full adventure books because they have a lot more of the what to do if they want to do this kind of thing, and
Hmm.
who can you have at the ready, NPC wise or encounter wise, to pull from at any given time. Uh,
Oh yeah.
Convention books are much more rigid, so that's why I'd say don't bother with them.
Yeah, like if your very first campaign you want to run one of those, one of the like Curse of Strahd or Tomb of Annihilation, totally do that. That's all the guesswork done for you. Another thing to look into if you're not super great on world building but you want to have more free form, find a setting book. I know that you can go out wherever fine Dungeons and Dragons books are sold, and you can find the entire setting guide uh, for oh, what's it called? Uh, Tal'Dorei, the one created by Matthew Mercer, and that's a great way to go about getting into a game your first time because it already has all of the beats there for you. It has the major NPCs, the locations and descriptions and monsters that are specific to the world and all that. That's great. It's a good place to start, especially if you're going to be world building. Using something like that as a baseline, it's a really good way to go about it because these guys have been doing uh, they've been playing games for a long time, and they've been some of them have written a lot of books on the subject and stuff like that. These guys that create the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guides, they have setting modules or setting packets out there that are really good to begin with. So don't feel like you have to create something all your own first time go, because it could be a really daunting task to sit down and do your world building like that. So don't feel like you have to limit yourself to that. But we'll cover more of that on the world building episode, I think, right?
Episodes, because designing a
Episodes.
world
Oh
takes
yeah.
forever. Uh,
That'll be a mini series. It'll take 2.5 years.
that's about right.
Um, but yeah.
If you or your players, this is like your first ever thing, like ever role playing game, then you could find this usually for free on from any system, D&D, Shadowrun, whatever the fuck. You get the quick start rules. If you're not comfortable with like the full book, or your players have never done something like this before, then just use the quick start rules. It's free, it's a lot shorter,
Yeah.
condensed. It gives you the basis for everything without bogging you down with information. Kind of takes the
Oh yeah.
idea of when you or them don't want to give each other more than like 1 page worth of backstory stuff. That's kind of how the quick start guide is. It's not 1 page, but it's a condensed version, so you don't have to read what effectively is an actual textbook in order to learn the game.
Yeah. Yeah, like and it reads that way some of them too, like Shadowrun. Oh my God, that was like I was trying to
Oh,
read
the non fluff stuff
oh
was just so dense.
oh my God. It was like reading a science textbook. I was like, wow. I got through like 4 or 5 pages and I'm like, man, I gotta take a break. This is intense.
And these games
This is
do make you
crazy.
do math. So
Oh yes. Oh yes.
it's like an algebra book mixed with an English comp book mixed with some other crap.
Oh yeah. It and to kind of go off on a slight bit of a tangent, if you are
Speaking of
interested in
math,
yeah, if you're interested in Dungeons and Dragons or whatever role playing game, keep in mind that this is a really good platform for you to express your creativity too, and that expression of self when you're world building or creating encounters, like we've said it before, you're probably not going to come up with something new and unique and
dude, coming up with
never been
something
done
new and
before.
unique is hard for everybody because fucking so many
Everybody.
ideas have already been taken.
Oh yeah, like everything to do with the campaign that I'm running, starting very soon. Uh, I was like, yeah, this is a great idea. I'm gonna do it like this, and it's gonna be like this, and there's gonna be these kinds of things and these kinds of things. And wow, did I just create something new? And when I presented it to one of the players that are gonna be playing with me, she's like, oh hey, that sounds a lot like this video game, and gave me the entire synopsis. And I'm like, wow, that just is like a kick in the
It
you know.
fucking sucks. The same thing
Yeah,
that happened to me in Latier, though I was the one who realized it. Uh, the tower in the south. When
yeah,
I came up with that and how it all works and everything, I was like, this is super cool. This is like, I feel like this is unique. It's got a lot of stuff going for it, yada, yada, yada. And I wrote The Dark Tower by Stephen King effectively.
yeah. Like
And I had
draw
never even heard
inspiration.
of that before. And then
I
I went to
know.
watch the movie and I was like, God damn it.
Yeah, it's so disheartening to just like, man, this shit I came up with, someone came up with like 30 years ago. It's stupid. I hate it.
Yeah,
But
it's the worst. Especially when you have like this ultra specific thing, and it's like there's no way, and then it turns out that a dozen people have already done it.
yeah, like so, don't feel like. Moral of the story is you're not gonna do something perfectly unique. You're not. Accept it now. Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, uh,
Anything,
every
any
role-playing
fucking
game
thing.
on the planet, somebody has already thought of it, and if they haven't already written something about it, they're probably in
You're
the
wrong because they
process of
did.
writing about it. And
It's
you're
already been
wrong.
made
Somebody
into a
already did.
movie, 6 video game series.
Oh yeah. So allow yourself a little bit of creative wiggle room in that. Now, flexing that creative muscle, absolutely important. Totally take the time to come up with these things, even if somebody's already done it. If you want to create a game where your main characters are fighting against these creatures, and they're fighting to help these guys that they're mystics and they're old and they really can't protect themselves, but they have a lot of like wisdom and power. But these other guys over here, they're just like gnarled creatures that are just monsters, and they're very powerful and physical. And you've got to try and like fix this thing and to save the world, and that's the Dark Crystal. Totally borrow those beats from other places, and look at those things when you're creating your game. I guarantee you, if you want a really good first encounter game to run, there are short campaign modules out there. There are a dozen people online who have said, I brought my players together like this. Do some research, look into it. Don't don't feel like you have to make everything new and fresh and unique,
Oh, yeah,
because you're
pre-existing
not.
setting. Like if you use something that you really like that's already out there as like a baseline, then chances are your players will have an easier time sliding into it. Like
Oh yeah.
if you're running a magic-based game and you decide that instead of trying to reformat like the Harry Potter universe and you just decide fuck it, it is like all the same thing, then that's a very familiar setting for a lot of people, so they'd have a very
Yeah.
easy time rolling with it, depending on what happens.
Like you can use Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition mixed with a little bit of D20 modern to create the Harry Potter universe. And you can run a game inside of Hogwarts. And it doesn't have to be a beat for beat of the story that's already written, but that setting is familiar and it's known.
Well,
You don't have to worry
does
about it.
leave a lot of room for you to be able to do
Oh,
what you want
totally,
with it,
totally.
because like you could never like Harry and the gang can fuck off. You don't have to ever interact with them. But like you could just be one of the other house students or whatever, like doing your own
Yeah,
thing on the side. Like it's a living world, so pretty easy to go with.
yeah. Like there's just so much that you can do with things that are already there, and there's a lot of open room, and even stories that have already been told. There's always the other side of it too, so keep that in mind as well.
Finally, I think one other technique, and this is a very blunt technique that you could do, is you can straight up on your very first game, like obviously you've sat down for the first time with your players. They know that you've never run a game before. If something comes up that doesn't work right or like turned out poorly, you can redact it. You can like be like, "Hey guys, I didn't think that like this creature for instance, would be so pivotal in this, or you would kill them in one hit.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
or you weren't supposed to kill them at all, that kind of thing. Can we like go back a little bit, or like I missed this plot point? Can we just rewind a little bit so that way I can explain this as an in-play thing, so that way you could just go back to the present and your characters like know about this thing that they're supposed to know about. Like it's fine
Yeah.
to ask. It's fine to do that.
Yeah. Also, if you're new and you let a player create a character, and it turns out that that character is totally overpowered for the setting, and makes absolutely no sense why they would be there, you can redact that too. So yeah.
We pretty much have like a big part of another episode dedicated to what happens when a PC becomes too powerful.
Oh,
Uh, oh yeah, we're gonna talk about that. Uh,
oh man,
but
that
that
has
actually,
happened.
you do bring up a point that I just thought of. If it's your first game, I noticed you said this earlier, like combine fifth ed with a smidge of D20, whatever that was. If it's your first game, don't combine systems.
Oh no,
First of
don't
all,
do that.
don't combine systems.
Don't do
And
that.
second, don't use any like, uh, don't go nuts with the house rules. And I would even go so far as to say don't use variant optional rules that you find in the rulebook, until you are more comfortable being able to have that be a consistent thing.
Yeah, because the worst possible thing that could happen is that the DM is I believe this was, I can't remember who said this, but I know it's been online. Uh, as a GM, you are a cat wrangler. That's what you do. You are letting a bunch of player characters run around a space and just wreak complete havoc on things. Like that's how you create murder hobos. But that's a whole other ball game. But that's your job, your responsibility to the game, and if that's what you want to run, that's great. That's fun. It's interesting. Some people want to just run around and kill shit, and
That's why I
that's
said
fine.
establish the baseline for role playing as one of
Yeah,
the very first things you do on the in the game,
yeah,
because if you don't want to have to be a cat wrangler like Xander is, then you you write it in such a way and you present the NPCs in such a way that it's like this isn't a go and blow up half the town, like party all the
yeah.
time. Everyone's going every which way. Like this is maybe not a full railroad game, but a more directed experience.
Hmm. Yeah. And as the GM, you you have to recognize the responsibility that you have, and that responsibility is to provide a space for your players to express and have fun with the storyline that you're presenting. And at the end of the day, if you learned something new and you experienced something that was outside of the norm for you, and you feel like you got a little bit more insight into how you play as a GM, then you have succeeded. Even if your campaign goes completely off the rails and it's an absolute mess, and you got to redact stuff and your rules are all crap, you learned something, and that's important. So remember to not be so hard on yourself, especially if it's your first game.
Doesn't have to be perfect. Never has to be perfect.
Never has to be perfect. It's not gonna be. My games aren't perfect. Nick's games aren't perfect.
Nope.
Bobby's games aren't perfect. Nobody's games are perfect.
Matt
And
Mercer, who you like bringing up, his games aren't perfect.
no, they're not. And uh, that's okay. It's absolutely okay to not be perfect in this space, because it's part of the challenge of growth. And the wonderful part about Dungeons and Dragons and other role playing games is it gives you a space to express ideas that is completely fictional. It's like using a mock computer on your PC to see how this program is going to interact with your your computer. It works exactly the same way. This is a space for you to express yourself and be creative, and it's a space for you to learn. And if you learn some some interesting, social contracts that you hadn't really expressed before, or you learn how to express yourself more clearly, and you've learned to become more articulate. That's a good thing, and that's what these games are really, really good for. So don't don't expect that your first campaign is going to be the cat's meow. It's not.
Well,
But
and
if you learn something, it's good.
if it does turn out basically perfectly, if you and everybody else has been very satisfied at the end of this first session, then make notes on what made it great, and then
Oh yes,
apply that
absolutely.
later on.
And tell us, because we want to know. We
So
really want to know.
yeah, one of the things, Xander, that uh, when I'm running a game, it's something I can feel. So it's kind of hard to describe, but you'll know what I'm talking about. I just call it the flow. It's when you don't have to look at your notes. You've already, even if you've already studied them, or if there's something new you added in, like when you're at the table and you're talking to players, you're able to talk to one of the characters and then instantly switch to the other end of the table to talk to somebody else, or interact with what they're doing, even if it's
Oh
like
yeah.
at a different location. But you're able to do all that without breaking stride and without checking your notes, because you already
Oh,
you like it's like you intuitively know where everything is in the game, which is why it's
that
kind of hard to describe because you're
that is
not looking at your
such a
notes.
good feeling, though.
It
It really
is, and
is.
if you can achieve that, you'll know first of all.
Oh yeah, you
Um,
will know instantaneously.
but whatever triggered that, then you can try to recreate that in other games.
Oh yeah.
Just because well, a it's super fun because then it's like you don't even have to try when you're running the game.
Mhm.
And B, it makes everything for everybody much more fun.
Oh yeah. Those are the game sessions that you and your players are going to remember for years on end. Those are the ones that are really satisfying.
Yeah.
It's like watching a satisfying video on YouTube. It's just good. And that's what you want. That's the space you want to live in as often as you can. Now that being said, I get that maybe once every 4 or 5 sessions if I'm lucky. And I'm trying, really actively to get to that point. So don't think that you have to master that, because clearly mastering that is not easy. So you know, take that with what you will. But
I just felt
totally.
like bringing that up just
Oh, it's such a
for the
good
brand
feeling.
new GMs because it is really nice.
Yeah, when you hit that mark for the first time, you will know instantaneously that you've
You're doing it right.
you've achieved something that not a lot of people get to
You've
experience. It's
achieved
unlike anything else.
Ultra Instinct.
Yeah, it's like that rush you get when you do something like it's
Uh,
impossible to describe.
uh,
You can't
well,
describe
yeah, that's true.
it. I was
Uh,
trying to and failed because you just can't.
that's right. But what you can do is run a very successful first game, and I would say try not to go into it with the anxiety. I know that's a tall order,
It's really hard.
but you're there with friends. Your friends know you're new to running games,
Mhm.
and if you relax and just let the game play and have a good time, and as I always say, the GM is a player too. So if you kind of act like a player playing your own game in a sense, then you will be able to have a very, very fun first adventure until your next adventure next time on Playing God.